The following program is being brought to you on the Voice America Variety Channel. For more information about our network and to check our additional show hosts and topics of interest, please visit voiceamericavariety.com. The Voice America Talk Radio Network is the worldwide leader in live Internet talk radio. Visit voiceamerica.com. The views and ideas expressed on the following program are strictly those of the host or guests and do not necessarily reflect the views and ideas held by the Voice America Talk Radio Network, its staff, and management.
Welcome to the Patricia Raskin Show, the program that helps you turn obstacles into opportunities, challenges into solutions, and find answers to tough questions. And now, the award-winning powerhouse voice of radio. Here's your host, Patricia Raskin.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back. I'm Patricia Raskin. Today, in our next interview, we're talking about coaching and why it works, how it can help you. My guest is Mary O'Sullivan. She's the owner of Encore Executive and Professional Coaching. And we're talking about how results-based coaching can save you time and reduce your stress and improve your health. And welcome, Mary.
Thank you, Patricia. It's thrilling being on with you again.
Yeah, thank you. And I know you have a corporate background, so you worked in the corporate world before you decided to become a coach. Explain that transition. Yeah.
Well, that was very interesting. For 30 years, I worked for major Fortune 500 blue-chip companies. I started with General Electric I started part-time in 1976, if you can believe that. And then I ended up there full-time in the 80s. And I also worked for Martin Marietta once GE sold their aerospace division to Martin Marietta. Then that was sold to Lockheed. So I worked for Lockheed Martin for a while in a number of different locations. And then we ended up in Rhode Island here at Raytheon. So that's pretty much been the entirety of my career, is the inner workings of major corporations.
Excellent. Yeah. So why do you talk about that transition to coaching and why? Because you work with a lot of people in corporate, correct?
Yes, I do. So how did I get into coaching? Well, it was a little bit of a difficult transition. I sort of was late mid-career, and there were a number of different management changes. And my dad passed away, and there were a few other things that happened in the family that just basically were, the universe was telling me it's time to move on. So they were very generous at Raytheon, and they offered me a voluntary layoff package, which included a tuition stipend. So I recommend people make sure you end on a friendly note, so they will give you these nice severance package things, and the tuition was one of them. And I went to the outplacement center that they had offered all people who took the voluntary layoffs, and the executive coaches there sort of prompted me into the field of coaching. And so I took my tuition money and I looked around for a high-quality coaching school, and I found one at the University of Texas, and it was a year-long, very intensive program. But I came out of there with a lot of knowledge on how to help people working in big corporations be more successful, and also for those that were ready to make the leap, how to do that in a successful manner.
So talk about one of the things that I think is so important in the corporate world, but for all of us, is this whole idea of working with our health, because if we don't keep our health intact, then we can't do anything. And we don't realize, and I didn't realize till lately, how much stress can really impact your health. I mean, really, really debilitate you just by having negativity in your life or thinking negative thoughts. So how can executive coaching improve your health?
Well, obviously, we're not in the business of curing diseases, but what we do try to help people focus on is how to overcome those stressful situations that you were talking about, how to find the barriers and obstacles that are stopping you from moving ahead, because a lack of progress in your career or repeated failures in your career is going to become extremely stressful for you. What I try to do with coaching is to provide people with mechanisms to deal or cope with some of these more stressful situations. We try to break down the issue that they're dealing with into the smallest, most minute parts till we get to the nub. And then we try to work around that little nub. And really the way to do it without causing yourself a lot of stress is what I like to call micro changes, Patricia. So I don't ever ask people or encourage people to make these great big jumps, because that in itself is not healthy. But to make small changes, it's kind of like going on a diet. If you go on a big crash diet, you're just setting yourself up for failure, like, oh, I'm going to just eat grapefruit and spinach for the next month. That's not going to happen. But maybe if you add one piece of grapefruit and a serving of spinach in every day until you get to where you want to be, by making micro changes, you can make these overall big changes. And I like to tell people it's like watching the second hand on a clock. The second hand is clicking. It's a great analogy because it's clicking really slowly, but yet every second counts. And it's
how do you convince your clients that when they're used to these big steps, so they're taking these little steps every day? And
well, we go back into how did that make you feel? So how did it feel when you had to all of a sudden get a much smaller office? You went from a private, high-walled office with a secretary into an open cube. How did that make you feel? That type of dramatic change has a huge impact on people's self-esteem, ego, and all the other things that go along with that. Well-being, self-confidence, presence, poise, all that sort of kind of goes out the window. So we ask people to think of making a big change, and how did that feel when suddenly your husband walked out on you? How was that feeling? And people don't want to go there, Patricia, because it's a very painful spot. So if we ask folks to make small changes and just, I like to use the words experiment and explore. Just experiment and explore something a little bit different. See how it feels and see if you want to try the next thing.
Mary, can you give us, go ahead, but when you have a minute, give us an example of that. I'd love you to give an example of, someone that you coached.
Examples. There's so many examples. Well, of course, all my clients are confidential, so I have to speak hypothetically. But a good example would be, let's say, getting a new job. Okay. So I had a client who quit, just walked out, just said, I'm never coming back here, and, felt pretty self-important when she did that, but a few months into it realized she didn't have any money. So she immediately felt that she was under big pressure to go find the same exact type of job. So she went out and really pounded the pavement and found nothing. And after a few months of super frustration, came in to see me. And so we talked about how she was going to land that next big job. And we talked about the reality of the job market. Some of the things that you and I both know are true today, like, well, if you want a $100,000 job, it's probably not going to be in this area. You may have to move. Is moving an option? No. Okay. So she kind of narrowed herself down. So we decided that the most important thing for her at the moment was a paycheck. And so she had an opportunity to get a job at the post office. Now, this was not a career path for her, but it was a manner for her to get a paycheck. So it was a small change that she made, and through coaching with me, we tried to help her ego not take a big hit on it, because the most important thing for her was that she had to pay her bills. And that time that she was working at the post office afforded her the mental space. It wasn't a mentally demanding job. It afforded her the mental space to start to think and plan about what her next steps were going to be.
And did she eventually, in going on with this, is that where she is now, or did she eventually find something?
Yes. Well, this is pretty recent, so she's still at the post office. As far as I know, I mean, she might have switched because, of course, around holiday time, the post office was hiring like crazy. But I ask people to not make dramatic changes, to just try to do one thing at a time. I had another client call me who said the woman that fired her is in the same social and professional circles as she is. And she said, I just don't know how to face her. And apparently she was getting very flustered and flabbergasted when she ran into this person. And she didn't know how to handle it. She said, what do I say? So I suggested that she simply smile, say hello, and then move on. And she just was just incredulous over that. I asked her, what's the need for a conversation? I said, you haven't completely dealt with her, but when you go to a meeting where she is, that's not the place to do that. So just by making that little micro change, by just changing your perspective a tiny little bit, and just say, you know what, I don't have to say anything here. If I'm going to have a showdown with her, it can be someplace else. It doesn't have to be in a public forum where everybody's on display. So things like that, Patricia, just small little changes that can make a huge difference.
And a lot of it is attitude. I mean,
it is.
Right? Because if you hadn't coached her, she might have still been panicking. At least now she's doing something. It may not be the money she made before, but she's moving towards something. Right.
Correct. And you're absolutely correct that attitude is so important. I've been reading a lot lately about exactly that topic. There's been a lot of studies and research done on it. And also there's been just some common sense books out there on it. I came across a book called Keeping Your Poise with Madam Chic. And it's just about a young gal from California who took a 5-month overseas educational sabbatical, I guess, in Paris and lived with a French family. And she learned more than the language there. She learned the art of courtesy, poise, hostessing, what to say in a difficult situation, how to handle guests, how to comport yourself in public, on and on. And that seems to be something that we are missing now in our modern society, kind of anything goes society. People forget how to behave in public. And the example I gave of the woman who was fired and was afraid to run into her former boss, it would have just taken some poise and grace to realize that you don't have to deal with the person. But instead, our society has this, speak your mind kind of theory behind it. And so she was in a bind. She knew she couldn't speak out, but she wanted to. So she didn't know how to behave. But little things like that. There's lots of research being done on the brain and posture. And the fact that when you go into some of these more difficult situations, that if you practice a power posture, there's a couple of different ones that they say, like the Wonder Woman posture with the hands on the hips and the legs akimbo.
There was there actually was a program on this. It was either CBS or 2020, where there's a woman who teaches this, that power posture really makes a huge difference.
It does, and I'm trying to teach my clients that because a lot of them come to me when they're so defeated, their egos have taken huge beatings, and therefore they can't muster that poise, that inner self-confidence to pull off a job interview or pull off an uncomfortable situation. So I've had people, well, where can I do it? And I said, just go in the ladies' room, close the door in the stall, and do it in there, and nobody's going to see you. and you just and that has an effect on the brain. So, this is just another one of those little things that people can do that they don't think of that I work with in the coaching situation.